This is PTV World. I am Syed Shabahat Ali and you are watching Fault Lines. President Biden declared on Wednesday that it is time to end the forever war in Afghanistan, saying that the United States had long ago accomplished its main mission and that leaving American forces there was no longer worth the cost in blood and money. Speaking from the same spot in White House where President George W. Bush ordered the start of war after September 11 attacks nearly 2 decades ago, Mr. Biden made a case that there was no longer any justification, if there was any, to believe that United States military presence could turn Afghanistan into a stable democracy. But there are concerns in Afghanistan. Taliban now precisely know when the Afghan government will lose the military support of their principal supporters. The chaos and uncertainty is frightening the Afghanis if the country is inching toward a civil war. Are Taliban again becoming the rulers of the land? Watch the package before we bring our first guest to the program.
With the recent developments in Afghan peace process, President Joe Biden has announced the withdrawal of all the American troops from Afghanistan over the coming months, completing military exit by the 20th anniversary of September 11th attacks that drew United States into its longest war ever. NATO allies have also decided to start withdrawing forces from the Resolute Support Mission in Afghanistan by May the 1st, with plans to complete the drawdown of all the troops within a few months.
We will start the withdrawal of NATO Resolute Support Mission forces by May 1st.
NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg called the move a start of a new chapter in NATO's relationship with Afghanistan, saying that allies and partners will continue to stand with the Afghan people, but it is now for the Afghan people to build a sustainable peace. The United Nations, however, said it will maintain its political and humanitarian mission to Afghanistan despite the departure of United States and NATO troops later this year. Stefan Dujarric, the spokesperson to the United Nations Secretary General, said it was clear and obvious that the troops' departure will have an impact on the country as a whole. The United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan is a small political operation comprised of approximately 1,200 employees, excluding the peacekeepers, the vast majority of whom are Afghan nationals. With all the United Nations agencies included, the organization's total presence in Afghanistan amounts to approximately 4,000 people, roughly 75% are Afghan. Pakistan in particular has had a very valuable role in brokering peace between Taliban and the United States. On multiple occasions, Pakistan has reiterated that there is no military solution in Afghanistan and says it will continue to work together with the international community in efforts for lasting peace and stability. This assistance by Pakistan led to the US-Taliban agreement of February the 29th, 2020, which laid the foundation for a comprehensive intra-Afghan peace agreement, including a permanent ceasefire to bring an end to the violence in Afghanistan. The question now remains: how will the Afghan peace process and the intra-Afghan dialogue shape?
To join me in my program, my first guest is a professor from University of Maryland, Professor David Haggerty. Professor, welcome to the program. My first question from you: has the war in Afghanistan come to an end for United States, or has US actually accomplished some objectives in Afghanistan?
Greetings. It's a great pleasure for me to be on Fault Lines, and I thank you for the opportunity to speak to you, Syed Shabahat Ali, and your other guests on the program about the situation in Afghanistan, in particular as it relates to the Biden administration's decision to remove American forces within roughly the next 4 to 5 months. The first question was, has the war in Afghanistan come to an end? And I think the answer to that question is the war itself, probably not. It depends on the Afghan leadership and the anti-regime forces and whether or not they can make some kind of a deal, a political deal to move forward in concert. The U.S. role, yes, is coming to an end in terms of military forces, soldiers on the ground in Afghanistan. We have to be clear about that. President Biden is adamant that 20 years has been too long. You probably recall that in 2009, when the Obama administration was considering its policy on Afghanistan, Biden was the vice president, and he was on the side of arguing for no surge in forces and a move to a more offshore counterterrorism posture with respect to Afghanistan. He lost in that debate. He was outvoted, and Obama surged 50,000 troops into Afghanistan with the sort of strategic goal of putting enough into the fight against the Taliban that they would see the virtue of a ceasefire and a sincere diplomatic negotiation to end the conflict. So the U.S. role in actual fighting on the ground in Afghanistan is over. That's for sure. And basically, the Biden administration's view is that it's time for the international community, including the United States and including Pakistan, to really step up and help to make sure that all the progress that's been made since 2001, 2002 is not wasted. And there has been a lot of progress, as I hope to talk about today.
Professor Hegarty, I'll have to stop you here for a while. Tell me, is this the end of American interest in Afghanistan? Or is it just a shift in strategy and US is just trying to eliminate the boots on ground?
So the question is, has the U.S. achieved its goal in Afghanistan, or has it realized that it has goals that are unachievable? What's behind the thinking of this decision that happened this week? And it's a complex question, as every question involving war and peace is. There are multiple goals, and I would argue that many of them in this case have been met in Afghanistan since 2001. Some of them have not been met. But let me just go through some of the things that we need to, I think, be cognizant of when we're talking about, the success or failure of this overall effort. First of all, the Taliban government, which was hosting al-Qaeda, was basically decimated, made to flee, and put out of business for a short period of time. Secondly, al-Qaeda forces themselves were disrupted and fragmented, and al-Qaeda core no longer exists in Afghanistan because of U.S. and NATO and other forces. The political situation is completely different. A constitutional democracy has been built in Afghanistan. There have been regular elections. It's not a perfect system, but it's a good system. And for the first time, it is a democratic system, warts and all. The U.S. has also conducted a massive relief and reconstruction effort in Afghanistan to the tune of $145 billion. The United States has nurtured and tried to enable the emergence of an Afghan civil society that represents every conceivable interest and is very, very vigorous today, with many women leading different efforts in a very impressive way that we didn't see before. Combat operations came to $825 billion. So if we add that to the 145, probably this year, the overall number is going to cross the $1 trillion mark, which is a huge amount of money, $50 billion per year. The goal that has not been achieved, unfortunately, is the goal of leaving Afghanistan with a prosperous, democratic, stable, secure government and society. Unfortunately, that goal has not been fully realized, although a lot of the steps toward that goal have been achieved. But the president has determined that at a cost that the American people are willing to pay, that goal is out of reach without a huge infusion of resources, military and diplomatic and economic. And as he put it a couple of days ago, we tried that. That was what we did, what we decided in 2009, that we were going to surge and really pump up the effort. And frankly, it just didn't work. Here we are a decade later. So that's...
Professor Hegarty, In the past, when United States was not there in Afghanistan, there was Taliban who were ruling the countries. United States came and tried to install a government in place, which is even today in place. But again, as United States is about to leave Afghanistan, Taliban are occupying the major holding of land. Taliban are still the strongest side on the table. And there is a likelihood that Afghanistan might just go back to civil war. How does that sound to the American polity?
So on the matter of, is this the end of U.S. interest in Afghanistan and attention to Afghanistan, or is it just a withdrawal of American boots on the ground? The answer is distinctly the latter. The United States will remain very engaged with Afghanistan and with this part of the world in general. Frankly, as it stands now, there are only two missions that U.S. military forces are a part of in Afghanistan right now. There's been a huge drawdown for years. Those two missions are the counterterrorism mission as well as the training of the Afghan security forces. So those are the only two things that are going on right now. The U.S. has not been engaging in ground fighting with the anti-regime forces at all. It has been providing air support in engagements against the Taliban, but that's it, nothing on the ground. The main mission going forward will continue to be the counterterrorism mission, and the administration has looked at that, and they've decided that while that might be somewhat diminished, it will still be possible to have over-the-horizon counterterrorism capabilities, things like aerial reconnaissance and rapid deployment forces from nearby areas. And there's a whole range of things that the U.S. Air Force can do in counterterrorism activities. So that's all being worked out and will continue to be worked out as the ground forces are removed. The U.S. will be still very, very generous in terms of economic and humanitarian aid toward Afghanistan because that is needed. It's not debated at all. That's the need. Military assistance, including training, that will be lessened, but I'm not sure it'll go away. I mean, it's quite possible that private contractors could train up Afghan forces almost as well as U.S. military.
Professor, the problem is not only military in nature. There is a huge economic front of the crisis as well. The Afghan government that is at the moment in place is almost solely reliant on the donations and the financial patronage of U.S. government. We don't know whether this patronage is also fading off from ground, or is it only the American troops that are leaving the country? Can you enlighten us a bit more about it?
So looking toward the future, what would the U.S. do if a civil war were to break out in Afghanistan in the next few years? I think that, frankly, it's impossible to say in the abstract. It would depend a lot on who the combatants are, if there was involvement of, say, ISIS or Al-Qaeda or other terrorist groups, significant involvement. That would be a real problem in the eyes of the United States because that represents a potential comeback of a threat to American homeland security. We shouldn't mince words on this. No U.S. president is going to want to send forces back into this theater. Nobody's going to be enthusiastic about it. So that's the kind of the default view. I suspect that if the U.S. did decide that there was a potential terrorist threat building up, that offshore capabilities would be the first choice, and that the U.S. would try to carry out military operations, but not with soldiers on the ground in Afghanistan. But I have a hard time seeing the American president doing that, at least this American president. I can't speak to what happens in the future. But we have to remember, there's been a lot of death and destruction in Afghanistan among Afghans more than anybody else. The U.S. has suffered losses, 2,500 lives, roughly 20,000 casualties. Something like 760,000 Americans have gone to fight in Afghanistan, and some of them multiple tours, 2 or 3 tours in Afghanistan. There's been a real toll on the United States from 20 years of combat. So I think it's going to really be the last choice on the menu of options as to how to respond.
Thank you very much, Professor Haggerty, for being my guest from Maryland. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a break here and we'll join back with the second segment of the program. Stay with us. Welcome back. I have with me from Geneva Mr. Tariq Farhadi, who is an ex-advisor to the President of Afghanistan, also the pioneer of modern Afghan currency and an expert of Afghan affairs. Tariq, welcome to the program.
Thank
Tariq,
you. Greetings.
do you think actually United States plan to leave Afghanistan after 20 years of occupation, but now in turmoil?
Well, hopefully that the peace talks would bear fruit, and we are all hoping, all trying, that some sort of stability comes to Afghanistan, and the world also wishes that, including Pakistan. And then, yes, for a few years, Afghanistan will need financial assistance from the world.
Tariq, if you were there in the place of the president of Afghanistan, what options do you think you would have had at the moment?
Well, to continue talks with various Afghan factions inside Kabul, because there is a High Council of National Reconciliation, to have direct talks with the council, not through emissaries and representatives, and offer solutions, basically. Peace talks have been stuck because not a very crisp offer has been given to Taliban on power sharing. And it is time that something new, after 8 months of talks in Doha, be presented to the Taliban that they can't refuse. But the solution would be to bring the Taliban into the power structure in Afghanistan, and from then on decide on other issues like elections and governance type. If we put election precondition, the Taliban have already rejected that, and so it's a non-starter. So first they have to be inside the power structure and then become a political force rather than a military force. And hopefully we can have elections down the line, but not now.
But Tariq, this is not an option at the moment. Taliban are not, very fond of elections and not willing to become part of anything like that. So in that case, what have been your options?
Yes, Taliban are not in favor of elections now. Maybe even philosophically, they are not in favor of elections as we know it, Western-style elections. But they might agree to some sort of system which would be a parallel to what you see in Iran right now, which is a number of people are selected first to run, and a number of people can vote for them, and those people are representatives of people. So there are so many ways to basically select a leader, but if the method of selection is the cause for the conflict, it is fair to say that we have to look at the method of selection.
Tariq, tell me if the Uzbeks, Tajiks, Hazaras, factions like Dostum are capable to join hands with the government and stand against Taliban to make sure that Taliban do not take over the entire country once again. Do you think that physically probable?
Well, the Afghan National Army is composed of all the ethnies of Afghanistan. And the Afghan National Army right now is opposing the Taliban. And we hope that through peace talks, there won't be a need for that eventually the Taliban can make peace and join the National Army. That's the plan that we're hoping for. We don't want more fighting, actually.
You might not want, but the Taliban have been fond of fighting. That is what they have been doing to defeat two superpowers, one after another. And right now, when the United States is on brinks of leaving the country, their hubris is on a different level. So do you think, when Taliban have all this firepower on their side, talks and offers would suffice to avoid a war in Afghanistan?
Yes, because Taliban were fighting against the US, which they deemed as the occupiers. The US is leaving. After that, the Taliban fight will not be so popular with the population of Afghanistan. So the people of Afghanistan will ask them, what are you fighting for now? And that is a legitimate question at that point, after September 2021, once the foreign forces are out. That was the biggest issue the Taliban were putting on the table for fighting. But once the foreign forces are out, yes, the government will open the door for them, and they can come and participate, even a generous participation. But if they continue to fight, I think the populations of Afghanistan in different areas would ask that legitimate question. And that is where the popularity of the Taliban, if there is any, will go down, because there's no reason for fighting. The US is out now. Who are you fighting against? The Afghans? So that is the point that might change in the battlefield, in the psychology of the battlefield. And the people of Afghanistan will defend themselves if they feel that the Taliban are here to impose a way of life. And indeed, the Taliban are defending an extremist brand of Islam that is not only a danger for Afghanistan, but it's also a danger for Pakistan. Remember, we have a border, but the problems are the same across the border.
I totally agree with you on that. Tariq, tell me, there are many international commentators that are now saying that Taliban might not this time try to take the central government of Afghanistan and then to deal with the rest of the world as a government that is supposed to have relation with other nation states. They might this time think of holding a larger territory of land, operating it independently, and allow someone else to lead the government in Kabul, which might be a very weak and symbolic structure dealing or coordinating different affairs with the League of the Nations. How do you comment on that? Would you agree to it with your understanding of Afghan matters?
Well, if the fighting stops in Afghanistan and violence against civilians stop, this is a solution. But we would like the Taliban to have interest in what's going on in the central government and have roles and responsibilities. The Taliban are Afghans, and if there are areas that come under their control in southern Afghanistan, in southwestern Afghanistan, in points of eastern Afghanistan, if they don't want to deal with the central government, that would be a partition of Afghanistan, which we don't wish. Nobody wishes that. The Taliban should move into a political structure. They should have representatives in the government. If they are holding territory, they should be part of the policy making in Afghanistan. They should see the difficulties of ruling a country that has challenges, poverty, climate, and they should be part of the whole comprehensive way of running the country and agree with other Afghans. We might see things very differently, but the Taliban have said that they recognize that Afghanistan is a diverse country. And then they have to demonstrate that and sit down with others around the table to manage this diverse country.
Thank you very much, Tariq, for being on my show again. It's always a pleasure to have you here. Ladies and gentlemen, I am now joined by an defense analyst based in Islamabad. His name is Khalid Mahmood. He's joining my show for the first time. Khalid, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for having me on the show. I'm looking forward to having a good conversation with you.
Khalid, tell me about this Taliban issue. It is being often said in the international media, particularly the print media, is very vocal about it, that Taliban are not centrally integrated into a unison. There are many factions that have conflict of interest, or at least a difference of opinion with each other. The stalwarts of their leadership are all gone now, and these are the times when Taliban can easily disintegrate. How would you comment on that?
I think I think you've got that point very clear. If you remember when the Doha deal was signed between the Taliban and the Trump administration, at that point we had many factions of the Taliban expressing their disapproval with a peace deal of any kind, understanding that they would have to give up the Islamic values that they believe in, that they previously governed with, to fit into an American-style democracy. Many factions were against this idea. I think a lot of the factions have now become very pleased with the fact that the U.S. has pulled back from the agreement they had made. This was one of the beliefs that the factional leaders, the pseudo-leaders inside the Taliban had, that the U.S. had many times made promises that they would reduce troops, that they would help to decrease the violence, find a way to integrate the Taliban into the government, but all those promises were left empty, all hollow promises. Many people within the Taliban leadership believe that this also was a hollow promise. So a lot of the factions, when this deal was made, they said that we aren't going to go along with this. We will not believe this. And a lot of pressure was put on the main leadership of the Taliban to find a way to back this thing off, because this was not going to happen the way they wanted. What we have now is a lot of the factions are now expressing greater support for the Taliban. Many people are saying that there will be a great deal of bloodshed now. But we need to be concerned more about disruptors than we need to be concerned about the factions of the Taliban. Groups like Islamic State, the TTP in Afghanistan, these groups can cause a lot of problems for any kind of peace deal that may happen in Afghanistan. And we need to be very clear that they are the troublemakers we need to be concerned with now.
Khalid, it's a very tricky situation for United States at the moment. The commitment that U.S. government had made 2 years ago to go from Afghanistan completely by 1st of May has not been met. And yet, the President of United States has given another deadline that looks fairly close and that apparently looks a final call. But Taliban say that the agreement or the promises made to them have not been met. Do you think now on the missing of this deadline of 1st of May, Taliban may start a season of offenses or a fresh fight against United States, which now has a very symbolic or little presence on ground?
I don't think we need to doubt that at all. I mean, the Taliban statement after Biden announced that he was going to extend, or he was considering extending the withdrawal deadline, the Taliban made it very clear that if the U.S. stayed one day after May 1st, there would be a spring offensive. The Taliban would kick up violence again. The problem we're looking at right now is that it's not just going to be Taliban violence we need to be concerned about. The Afghan National Forces will be attacking Taliban outposts. The Taliban will be carrying out assassinations, targeted assassinations against government officials. They will be after senior leadership in the U.S. military. They will carry out attacks against the U.S. military. But we need to be more concerned right now about whether the Taliban actually has the ability to bring peace in Afghanistan. I mean, yes, according to many of the international reports, just 12.5% of Afghanistan is controlled by the Taliban. Our estimations put it somewhere around 65, 70%. When they have 70% control of the country, they really don't have to make a lot of concessions in terms of what can and cannot happen. So we're very concerned with the Taliban taking a very strict line now and saying that these will be the guidelines, and we will carry out very, very heavy attacks against the military, against the Afghan military, against Kabul, against government officials, just to get our point across that we don't need to compromise anymore. So yes, we need to take that into consideration, that the Taliban has been very clear that they will go into an offensive mode. This is something the U.S. needs to do.
Has been using various militant factions or various militant outfits placed in Afghanistan against Pakistan. And Pakistan has given all these evidences in form of a dossier to United Nations. It is said by some critics that now when Afghanistan is gradually moving toward a post-America scenario, India might not be very comfortable with Taliban taking a major lead now, because this might end all the strategic resources that they have developed to destabilize Pakistan. How would you comment on that?
Completely agreed. Completely agreed. India has spent 20 years investing into infrastructure, investing into narratives, investing into getting a mindset built in Afghanistan that Pakistan is against the Afghan people. That is not true, but India has done such a good job of placing that inside the Afghan mentality that Pakistan now has another war to fight inside of Afghanistan, that we are somehow their enemies. India has been able to leverage every militant group they have inside of Afghanistan, whether it be the Baloch Liberation Army or the TTP or Lashkar-e-Jhangvi or anyone else that may be aligned right now. The problem we have to understand is that India is going to have a lot more problems with letting China and Russia into Afghanistan, because China being inside of Afghanistan, being a strong an infrastructure partner, being someone that can assure security on the ground, that takes away the Indian counterpart, because India has so far been able to get their influence into Afghanistan based on the amount of money they have spent and the amount of training they brought in with their military. Yes, we understand their military training has been more towards the militant, but the Afghan National Army does still see the Indian Army as an asset to them. If China comes in and they become a strong force inside of Afghanistan, which is what we see happening with China, Russia, and Pakistan being such a stabilizing force, we will see minimalized, and India will not accept that. They've already made that clear. There's a number of reports that come out of Indian think tanks talking about the post-American world inside of Afghanistan, what India needs to do to move inside of that world. So we do know there will be a militant response, there will be an economic response, there will be probably a social response, but we need to understand that India is not going to go heavy from the Afghanistan side to make the Western border much weaker for us.
Thank you much, Khalid, for being on my show. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a break here and we'll join back with the third segment of the program. Stay with us. Welcome back. In the last segment of my program, I have with me Dr. Shabana, who is HOD from Quaid-e-Azam University, Department of Defense and Strategic Studies. Dr. Shabana, welcome to the program. How do you think what is running in the mind of President Biden at the moment, who has not allowed his troops to withdraw on 1st of May, but has given a very nearby deadline of September 2021?
You know, if you look back the track of the administration, the US President Trump and now the President Biden, they have been swindling by giving the statements from 4 weeks to 10 weeks to a year. So this is nothing new really what is happening in American mind. Obviously we cannot be experts that what are they thinking, but what we can add is that one can judge really is that they are fed up of being engaged in Afghanistan. And that is a very, very short-sighted perception on the American end. And they want an exit at at the earliest as possible. That was one of his agendas during the polls for presidency. So this is happening here, and unfortunately, this is not going to end the turmoil that they have created in Afghanistan since last 20 years.
Dr. Shaba, do you think this is going to be an end of American interest in Afghanistan? Because America has been there for the last 20 years.
Realistically speaking, I don't think so it's going to be an end. Americans cannot afford to end an engagement in this part of the world, whether it is engaging with Russia or with China or with Pakistan or the larger interests. There are multiple challenges that they are facing regarding their perception of BRI, CPEC, how to deal and develop India as a counterweight to the China. And so they cannot afford. They can neglect and they can be, overlook the fact that how to put Afghanistan in order with the original agenda where they came in 20 years earlier. But unfortunately, what it seems, if you read the American mind, is that President Biden is thinking and working on 3 lines: on geostrategic elements, number 2 is the climate, and number 3 is the pandemic. So these 3 and economic uplift of Americans to compete with the rising China.
Dr. Shaba, we have missed, the Americans have missed the deadline of May, and they have given a deadline that's very close. So Taliban at the moment are not happy about this arrangement, and they have given their official statement that America has not lived up to their expectations, and now they are not under any burden of any agreement. They have also decided not to participate in the process of negotiations to be done in Turkey. How do you think Taliban are going to respond to the situation at the moment?
Actually, it seems a double track for Taliban, to my perception. Because since if you read the record of the developments in Afghanistan, Talibans have been successfully capturing the mainlands of Afghanistan. And this gives them more boost to their insurgency or their movement. Many people, even from Uzbek elements, and they have been co-opted with the Talibans, and they are making already a broad-based agenda and the arrangements. Unfortunately, since the US and the other partners didn't materialize the deal that was originally struck by President Trump with the Talibans in office. So what we see is basically I think Taliban cutting off from the American peace deal is basically they can afford. They are in a much powerful, if you look at the geostrategic dynamics, they are in much powerful position in Afghanistan. And how, the important point we should be registering, how it is going to register a broad-based Afghanistan peace process in Afghanistan. This is the major dilemma that nobody is looking into it.
We have heard United States President's speech which says they have achieved their objectives, they have achieved their targets, and they have said that there is no IS on ground or ISIS on ground. Do you agree with these objectives that have been accomplished, or is it a bit of optics that is at play at the moment?
I think this is, they want to go home with the face-saving techniques. The fact is that Americans have not achieved their objective. Yes, they have achieved the objective of being on ground on Afghanistan and being in sort of semi-arrangement and backing the regimes from one or another type. They have not, they came, if I remember, they came with the promise of rebuilding Afghanistan. They came with the promise of economically uplifting Afghanistan.
And eliminating Al-Qaeda.
Yes, Al-Qaeda was dislodged from Afghanistan, we must admit. Osama bin Laden was killed in an operation by Americans, and many other leaders. This was their militarily, good or whatever positives that Americans think of. But what about the losses that Americans have suffered? We must also think that American families and of those who were killed in this process, they are also the casualties of the war on terror. So if you look at the balance sheet, the economic or the financial cost of US staying there is huge. And so that is a pressure on Biden and was a pressure on Trump, how to come back by minimizing the military and the financial cost of their stay in Afghanistan.
Dr. Shaba, from Qatar talks, Doha talks, to Troika in Russia, and then the Turkey talks that Taliban have refused to participate in. How do you see these negotiations, and has anything been achieved out of it or not?
I think a lot has been achieved. If I, why Russia is engaged in Afghanistan, they have been quietly talking to Taliban as well. And they have also been obviously engaged with the Northerns, but more with the Taliban and anti-Northern or anti-American forces. And China has been in contact and has, yielded and also been receptive to their ideas and hosted them as well, and in the three-party arrangements. And of course, Pakistan has been a key player there. So what it seems is Iran is also heavily engaged indirectly within consultation with even the Taliban elements. So what really it comes to mind is that everybody around Afghanistan, if you look at regional scenario, they want to have a stability in Afghanistan. And there seems to be an underline that they are not satisfied with the ongoing Americans' presence there and lack of durable peace, which the Americans have failed to deliver on all broad meters in Afghanistan.
So do you foresee a civil war coming in Afghanistan once again and uprooting millions of Afghans from their places, or do you think the sanity will prevail this time?
I think the first part that you said, a sort of uncertainty will prevail in Afghanistan for some time. As I've said earlier, the Taliban are in a much strong position than they were earlier. And there, if you read the Kabul texts and other newspaper sources, that the people of the civil society, they are fed up of war at journal, and they want to co-opt with the sort of Taliban arrangement, provided the Taliban gives them assurances that their rights and their liberties and will be protected and regarded. So this is one thing. Yes, there is going to be a very negative fallout on people at large, on economy at large, and on other dimensions of social development. But unfortunately, if Afghanistan slips into the turmoil, it's going to take a heavy toll on its neighbors, specifically Pakistan.
Final question, Dr. Shaba, how Pakistan is setting into this equation and how Pakistan will be affected with the future course of things in Afghanistan?
Frankly, I think if you read the history, Pakistan has been the most sufferer on turmoil in Afghanistan. Although we have been labeled as the bad boys by most of the outside players, even at times by the regional players. But the fact is that Pakistan has bared Afghan refugees very graciously, still houses it, even after Al-Qaeda's operation was dislodged, even after that. And even in the later stage that is coming, we are forcing more people coming from Afghanistan, and on humanitarian ground, obviously the Pakistan has to host them. And secondly, the Pakistan interest, I think Pakistan has always remained an unsung hero in the history of Afghanistan. If you talk to the civil society in Afghanistan, it is very disheartening. They have a lot of misperceptions vis-a-vis of Pakistan's role there. And that is not because of their own making, because of the negative propaganda that has been generated by the outside players or the spoilers who have been working very actively in Afghanistan's affair.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saiba, for being in my show. Ladies and gentlemen, as we are going closer towards September 2021's deadline, there is a lot that has to happen in Afghanistan. The response of Taliban from between May and between September is very important. We just hope that Afghanistan does not become a place full of crisis once again, and it does not become a war zone once again for the civil war that has destroyed the peace and stability of the country for such a long time. We'll join you with another program next week, and until then, Allah Hafiz.